Welcome to our Saturday Simulcast Sunday version. Of course, the big bowl announcement today, the December 5th bowl announcement for Purdue to be heading back to Nashville and the Music City Bowl. Purdue will play Tennessee on December 30th, 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 o'clock local time. A game will be televised on ESPN. And I'll start with you, Tom. Interesting just because, with the bowl landscape, the contract changed so Purdue could go back there. Mike Babinski said it made some sense because it's a drivable game. Actually, Knoxville's not as close to Nashville as Babinski said. It's still 180 miles away. Purdue's 360 miles away. You're going to have what appears Tennessee's played there twice and sold it out twice. I think over time this is Purdue's going to play in front of a hostile crowd and still will probably draw relatively well from its own fan base.
Yeah, a game, like you said, Alan, both fan bases can get in their car and drive there. That's huge, right? That has a good chance to accentuate the attendance down in Nissan Stadium in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm excited about the game. I know Purdue fans don't have good memories of the last.
That's probably part of this also, I think.
63-14, but I tell you what, I think there's going to be just a zillion Tennessee fans there. As you talked about, it's been a few years since they've been to this bowl game, about a 3-hour drive. But I think there's just a sense of excitement around their program too. It's a massive program with a massive following, a first-year head coach in Josh Heupel, who's given that success star fan base something to be excited about. And so I think they're really going to pump up the volume on December 30th down there as well. It's going to be a fun matchup with these offenses too, guys. Tennessee's offense goes at a quick pace. They score a lot of points. We all know what Purdue's offense is like too. So this could be a ball game that could feature a lot of big plays and a lot of points and maybe a lot of excitement too.
Brian, you look at this one and at the press conference on Sunday night, we all listened to Jeff Brom or hear what he had to say about there's some interesting questions that we'll find out shortly. Obviously, George Karlaftis and David Bell, even Aiden O'Connell's long-term status discussed. Bowl games are interesting. Little teams play differently sometimes. I mean, Purdue, Jeff Brom's team played very well in the Foster Farms Bowl in a far different opponent than Auburn. But it seemed to me, Jeff Brom said this is a lot of preparation that they're going down there to play for business reasons, certainly. And maybe also that he talked about the sting of that 56-point first half by Auburn against Purdue that seemed to be to wash up a little bit of that as well. Did you get that sense, or how do you see this going into this one?
Well, I think bowl games, oftentimes are just a product of circumstance. I think, there is something to be said for who wants to be there more. And I think a lot has to do with the draw and, perhaps some teams who fell to a level they perhaps didn't deserve or moved up to a level they didn't deserve. Funny things happen. And I thought that Auburn team was, a New Year's Day type of team. And I think that for whatever reason, they kind of slipped through the cracks. And when that happens and, you're a 500 Big Ten team who ends up with what could have been like a 10-win Auburn team in the SEC, some things don't line up. And, I think some things didn't line up for Purdue that day. And, you give Auburn a month to prepare for Rondell Moore and it's hard to get Rondell Moore going. And, I think that was kind of a convergence of things that happened that kind of led to that outcome. I think, that's the risk you run here too, is that you have a Tennessee team with SEC athleticism, a really high-powered offense, and one that will be playing a de facto home game. I guess it kind of comes down to how motivated is Tennessee too. How motivated is Purdue? I mean, Purdue earned this because Purdue has been in a not so good place the last 2 years. Tennessee obviously hasn't been the Tennessee that, it's reputed to be oftentimes, but it will be interesting to see kind of how things play out in terms of just how engaged both teams are. I would imagine Purdue will be fully engaged. We'll see if they're fully equipped, because obviously George Karlaftis and David Bell have decisions to make. Those are pretty big pieces, obviously. So I guess we'll find out exactly what Purdue is bringing to Nashville.
Yeah, Purdue comes in a 2.5-point underdog, at least by Vegas, on the front end, and that is an interesting lot in its own right. And Tom, you look at this game and tempo sounds like it's going to be. Hendon Hooker's had a terrific year, at least in terms of 26 touchdowns and 3 picks and thrown for 2,700 yards. It kind of pales in comparison to Purdue's quarterback, but he didn't play in every game, I think, as well. But this is a team that likes to play fast. It sounds like. Watched them a little bit this year. Saw them in their win over Kentucky. Of course, that was their only win over a ranked foe. But they played plenty of ranked foes throughout the course of the season. And like you said, Tennessee's fan base is one of the more unique ones, and they have been starved since the back to the days of T. Martin in 1999 or whatever that was when they won the national championship. It's been really not totally scorched earth since then, but it's been not to the level that you would expect, that Tennessee fans would expect, and maybe they are seeing a little bit of that in Josh Heupel.
Just a real chaotic program, Alan, last 10 years or so. A lot of turnover in the administration, the AD job. Head coaches, Derek Dooley was a disaster. Our friend Butch Jones.
Yeah.
And then now they've got some stability, it looks like, possibly here.
What do you remember about the Greg Schiano era?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They beat 6 that high. I don't think they'd like to have that back. But yeah, Josh Heupel comes with a nice resume. They hired him from Central Florida. Of course, he was there for a couple of years. He followed Scott Frost. Of course, Heupel was at Missouri for a couple of years, and he was the OC in 2017 when Purdue waxed the Tigers in Columbia, Missouri. But yeah, you're right. It's going to be a challenging offense. Hendon Hooker is kind of what Michael Penix was supposed to be this year, right? Real dual threat quarterback. It's going to pose a lot of problems. I saw Tennessee just bits and pieces of them in several games this year, and yeah, I know the fan base is excited, and they've got some momentum here. Like I said, they think they found a coach, and I'm sure they want to send a statement. I'm sure they're going to have a fully charged up roster too. Again, this is a program with a lot of history and a lot of pride, and they want to climb back up that SEC East mountain, guys. It's been a while, as you talked about, Alan. Got to go back to Philip Fulmer, for crying out loud, really.
Yeah.
So it's the challenges are going to be large. I think Brian alluded to that, especially if you're going in there with a roster minus number 3 and minus number 5, and Bell and Karlaftis both. It's going to be a big enough challenge even with those two guys. So the coaching staff's resourcefulness is going to be tested. We'll see what they've got. Just a great opportunity, right? And a good chance to take a step toward 2022. We talked too about the uncertainty of Bell and Karlaftis for this game. Guys, there's also uncertainty that Jeff Brom talked about according to the future of Aiden O'Connell, right? Is he going to come back in 2022? Sounds like we could get some clarity on that in the next couple of weeks. And Brian got a good answer out of Jeff Brom today, I thought, when he said Jack Plummer's going to be with the team through the bowl game, which really made my ears perk up. And that says a lot about Jack Plummer, I guess. And just good for the program to have that guy want to be around and ride it out through the bowl game, too. So some interesting developments we learned about today as far as this roster goes.
Brian, you look at that, and we're not saying that Karlaftis and Bell, we don't know. And, you think about David Bell in the injury at Notre Dame. We've talked about that at length, about the fact that he could have packed it in for the year. Both these guys love to play football. Jeff Brom was you prompted him as well, I think, on that question of he's saying, boy, I like to I have an opinion, and we got him to say that it was clear that he would at least have a conversation about asking for the sale, so to speak, of whether those two guys play. And they're both high motor, great motivated guys, and I can understand if they don't. But how do you view this? I mean, do you take it for what it is right now and just wait it out, and it's kind of either way they go? They you can understand why they would make either choice at this point.
Well, for everybody involved in all of this, this is business. I mean, for the coaches, this is business. For the players, this is business more than it's ever been. And this is going to become one of those things. This is already becoming one of those things where it's being normalized. I can't remember who the first was, but I remember Christian McCaffrey didn't play in Stanford's bowl game. This is going to be something you're going to see every year, because it makes a lot of sense from a business perspective, because there's so much money on the line. There is so much. Football is not for the faint of heart. Obviously, right. there is considerable risk every time you go out on a football field. Years ago, it wasn't a bowl game, but it was the bucket game. Gene Murskowski, remember, tore his Achilles or tore his knee up or something.
That cost his only missed game, right? Yeah.
That cost him his shot. That cost him. He would have been drafted, I think. Instead, he wound up being an undrafted free agent. Stuck around the Patriots for a few years, but that guy could have been a mid to late round draft pick. He could have had some security going to the NFL, but the injury did him in. So I think this is something fans and onlookers and whoever else are just going to have to get used to, that this sort of thing is a decision these guys have to make. And if it goes the way that sort of decimates your team at the end of the season, I don't know if that's something anybody can justify vilifying those guys over, because look at what they have on the line here. Their whole futures here. Their earning potential, their family's earning potential. The difference between being a first round pick and being an undrafted free agent or a mid round pick is immeasurable. And it makes so much sense to lay out, not take that risk, start preparing for the NFL, start getting all your ducks in a row. It probably would be amplified at a place like Purdue as opposed to some places that have more guys in Alabama and Ohio State, whatever, because those obvious early entry guys, aren't as frequent at a place like Purdue as they are other places. So it's probably a bigger story here than it would be a lot of other places. The fact there's two of them at once, and both of those guys have been such a big part of your identity here the last couple of years, such a big part of what got you here in the first place, in-state guys who people have identified with for so long. I think that would make this probably something difficult for Purdue fans and whatnot to accept if they opt not to play. But I think if you look at it from their perspective, you have to understand what's on the line for them too. And I wouldn't blame them one bit if that's what they end up deciding.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting development here over the next week or so. And yeah, George Karlaftis has not only a first round pick, maybe a top 10 to 12, maybe, you're hearing all kinds of numbers there. It's pretty substantial for both of those guys, but certainly
he can't play.
Yeah, but you know what? It's interesting in those guys. I agree with you on surface. You can't, but you just well, I don't know.
If that was your son, Alan, would you let him play?
Well, I would certainly look at the cost benefit analysis here, and the only Karlaftis, both those guys are interesting guys in terms of effort and all that. But I understand. My point is, I agree with both of you. Is you can't knock them for whatever they do. But Brian, what were you going to
say? You guys remember Jake Butt?
Yeah, the tight end.
Tight end played in that bowl game and blew his knee out.
Yeah.
I think context matters here too. One thing to keep in mind is Purdue gets guys like David Bell and George Karlaftis by illustrating to them, hey, you come here and you get your opportunity right away. You get better on the field, and by the time your third year is done, you're going to be in a position to do this. Rondell Moore was the same way. These were all 3-year plans, and now that's been presented, that's the foundation of this player and school relationship. It would be hypocritical for anybody to say, if you're more worried about that than this, then you're not a good teammate or whatever, because that's been the thing all along. Caleb Swanigan comes from Purdue to play basketball simply to get to the NBA as fast as possible and to be to give himself the best chance to play the position he was going to. He felt he was going to need to play. That's the only reason Purdue got Caleb Swanigan. When I say this is business for the coaches, this is business for the universities, this is business for the players too. This is what I'm talking about. It's about presenting opportunities that can help get these players where they need to go, and that's how you get them. And that's the very foundation of this, the reason those guys are at Purdue in the first place for the most part. So I think that's pretty important context for people to understand.
Yeah, and I think so too, and I think it's going to be. But I do agree too that Purdue's a little different animal. That they don't have George Karlaftis and David Bell don't come around every day, so it could be damaging to what Purdue will put on the field. Obviously, if those guys don't play. All right, Tom. One last thing on football, then I want to ask Brian about Purdue's impending number one pick or number one ranking in AP. But Tom, one last question about just the fact that the schedule looks like the Jeff Brom was a little bit still not committed exactly, but they thought practice would start on this Friday. That we know that Brom is out recruiting, going back out recruiting. This is all trying to solidify that class before the December 15th signing date. What do you look at the schedule and say that, from a bowl prep standpoint, that we're going to have basically 3 weeks to get ready?
Yeah, like you said Friday will be practice number one. They don't know their media availability schedule just yet. He talked today about, this is no breaking news. All the coaches do this, but in your bowl prep, you like to give a lot of your younger guys quality time in practice. They didn't get a lot of quality reps during the season. So, you guys have heard it referred to as a second spring football practice as well. And again, you can't ever discount those reps on the practice field. And Purdue's got plenty of young players, guys, to continue to develop. I got a story I'm going to post this week on the true freshmen of the class of 2021. And I guess their lack of impact. Most of these guys aren't going to use a year of eligibility. These are going to be guys who will benefit from getting these additional practices here leading up to that December 30th bowl game. So, again, December 15th, right? That's signing day. And, Brian's been chronicling the recruiting process. I think there's 18 or 19 commitments here in this class. And they're still wooing guys, as you talked about, Alan. Jeff Brom's still on the road. And the transfer portal too, right? I'm sure our subscribers and viewers have noticed Purdue has some offers out to some portal guys, a couple offensive linemen, a wide receiver. So I know Jeff Brom's going to always look in the portal. So there's plenty of roster adjustment that's going to go on as well. So it's going to be, there's no off season. That's nothing new, but it's a more exciting time, I think, with the portal now. And now you got a bowl game going on too. So there's a lot going on football wise. It's crazy, isn't it? You kind of talk, you want to celebrate this 8-4 football team. And oh, by the way, Purdue's going to have the number one team in the country in basketball. You got a volleyball team in the Sweet 16 as well. So it's a high cotton for the Purdue athletic department right now. So Purdue football is part of that. So it's been a fun year for all these fans, I'm sure, to enjoy all this success across multiple sports here.
Yeah, Brian, I want to get on that, and obviously this is hardly a footnote, but this would be for the first time in Purdue men's basketball history. The Boilermakers are assumed to be the number one team, and I think that's going to happen come Monday around lunchtime or whenever the rankings actually come out. Friday night's game was a challenging one, and you've talked about that at length, about just the fact that these kind of things are going to happen. Iowa's a good basketball team and makes things challenging, but certainly there is a lot of value in that number one ranking for a number of different reasons, and not just the fact that you got a big target on your back, but this is a thing that can show that your program has arrived, maybe even to more people.
Yeah, being number one I have to be careful not to talk, before it becomes official, but becoming number one would become part of Purdue's brand here. People would now associate Purdue with, hey, Purdue is number one. Talked to two different recruits this past weekend, and both said, yeah, Purdue's number one. That's awesome. Obviously without being prompted. But that's just the notoriety that comes with it, the attention that comes with it is invaluable, but the responsibility that comes with it is really difficult because, pride comes before the fall here. And I think you saw Purdue let up a little bit against Iowa the other day. They were, I think when they were up 19, I think they got a little bit sideways. I thought throughout the game, I thought maybe they complicated some things they hadn't been complicating. Prior, I thought there was some instances where, as Matt Painter said, they got a little cute, and I think it was clear that that was the case. I think, being number one, now puts the proverbial target on your back. And I think Purdue already had that to a certain extent. Whether or not that's actually manifested itself at all at any point in time this season, I don't know. It might have on Friday night for all we know. But I think Purdue is going to have to take a lot of lessons from the final 10 minutes of that Iowa game and understand that this isn't about looking good. This is about playing good. And that everybody from here on out, whether you're number one, number four, number six, number seven, number eight, number nine, whatever, they are going to play their what's off against you. And you have to match it. If you want to win the Big Ten, you have to not lose a game like you very easily could have lost against Iowa. Now, that being said, Purdue never trailed Iowa. So we're sitting here talking about a win like it was a loss. But when it gets down to two there in the last couple of minutes, obviously that's the defining memory of that game. But Purdue has to, if it becomes number one, Purdue has to then live up to that standard. And I think that standard, coupled with how they respond to what happened against Iowa there in those last 10 minutes, will be a really good opportunity for Purdue to improve, to mature, to tweak their approach as needed. Also to understand that they have to take care of the basketball better than they've been taking care of the basketball. Look, the press, the backcourt trapping, it wasn't a press, it was backcourt trapping. That was only a fraction of Purdue's turnover problem. It's what gets the most attention, yes, but there were a bunch of other turnovers in that game, that balls just getting thrown straight out of bounds, passer and receiver not on the same page, just stuff that can and should be cleaned up. And I think that Iowa game, coupled with Purdue becoming number one, presumably, can really be a positive convergence of events here for Purdue in terms of how they conduct themselves moving forward.
Yeah. One last question for you, Brian. Rutgers and North Carolina State this week, and again, teams that both have had. North Carolina State's had a couple injuries that have hurt them. Rutgers is not maybe the Rutgers that we saw the last couple of years or last year maybe, but games Purdue can win, but games on the road again with that target on their back. What do you expect?
Purdue's better than Rutgers by a long shot this year. You couldn't say that the last couple of years. I think them losing Miles Johnson and Montez Mathis, those guys were a big part of the edge that always was something that was problematic for Purdue. Some of those Purdue teams were softer than this Purdue team anyway. So I don't know if that would have been as big a problem this year. Purdue stacks up really well with Rutgers. Rutgers is obviously struggling badly. They lost to Lafayette. And just are completely sideways right now relative to where they were the last couple of years. Purdue ought to win that game. Purdue probably ought to win that game comfortably. The NC State game, I watched NC State play last week, one of the worst basketball games I've ever seen in my life. That 4 overtime game with Nebraska, where I think halfway through the second overtime, the players just stopped celebrating positive things because they didn't even care who won anymore. Purdue is much better than NC State. Purdue's much better than Rutgers. Purdue's much better than NC State. The question is, does Purdue face those teams like they're playing Michigan, like they're playing Ohio State, whoever it might be? Purdue has to understand, if we're number one in the country, we need to be number one in the country every single game. And especially in those Big Ten games, as I always say, not that I'm some bastion of wisdom here, but you don't win Big Ten titles by beating Michigan and Michigan State and all the other teams at the top of the league. You win Big Ten titles by not falling asleep on a Wednesday night at Wisconsin like they did a few years back, or losing at Rutgers when you're the much better team. And this will be a good test of Purdue's attention span more than anything, because this string of 5 straight high major games here that started with that Iowa game. Purdue should win every one of them, but Purdue has to actually go out there and live up to its standard here. And it'll be a good test of this team's consistency, this team's attention span, and kind of so on and so forth. But Purdue should beat Rutgers. Purdue should beat NC State.
Yeah, Rutgers lost by 35 at Illinois in its Big Ten opener, but beat Clemson by 10 at home, and then lost at UMass as their last 4 games, and lost at home, like Brian said, to Lafayette. So that's
something
that's
to keep in mind here too, is that this is the first real Big Ten road game for any of these guys, or for most of these guys. And now, obviously, they played in Connecticut in front of a split crowd, but one that was pretty enthusiastic for Carolina and pretty enthusiastic for Villanova. But also the fact that Rutgers isn't very good. I don't know if their environment will be as energized as it has been in the past. All those ornery New Jerseyans. So it'll be interesting to see what the environment's actually like. But this will be really the first true, real Big Ten road game for most of Purdue's teams. Everybody but Travion Williams, Eric Hunter, Sasha Stefanovic, and Isaiah Thompson, really.
Yep, going to be a storyline to watch. All right, guys, thanks so much. On a late Sunday night as we get ready for another busy week at GoldandBlack.com. And, of course, we want to thank our sponsor of the Saturday night simulcast, and that's the Union Club Hotel and the 811 restaurant as well. And we will be back next week. We'll see what our timing is for this one, too, because, of course, Purdue plays next week. They'll be playing. Brian will be on the road. We'll maybe be doing a recording on Saturday night or Saturday afternoon from in between games, as Brian will be at Rutgers, and then of course in Brooklyn when Purdue plays North Carolina State on Sunday. So we'll check local listings. We'll get back to you and exactly probably do it after that North Carolina State game, but I'm not 100% sure. So stay tuned to the site, and thanks to you all for watching and listening. Have a great week, everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing you in our next edition of the Saturday Simulcast.